Hey there, welcome to today's live conversation. Today I'm going to be talking about building your Sandtray miniature collection, especially if you are just getting started. So I'm Kathy Spooner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and registered play therapist supervisor here in the United States. And I have almost 30 years experience working in the mental health field with children, adolescents, and adults, and using play therapy and expressive arts. So if you're joining me today, go ahead and post your name and where you're from in the comments. I'd love to see who's here. Post your questions. Feel free to join in with your suggestions. And if you find this helpful, please like and share it. If I go live every Wednesday on LinkedIn, YouTube, and in my private Facebook group for mental health professionals, Play and Expressive Arts Therapy Playground. So if you're watching from YouTube, feel free to hit the subscribe button so you can get notified when I go live and hit that notification bell. All right, so today I want to talk about where and what miniatures will be the most cost effective for you if you are just getting started using Sandtray therapy. So you've gone to your Sandtray training, you've gotten a good foundation of how to use the modality, and now you really want to focus on building your Sandtray miniature collection, which can be a little on the pricey side. Hello, Facebook user from Utah. Oh, I forgot to say thank you for reminding me. If you're joining from Facebook, feel free. You're going to have to give StreamYard permission so I can see who you are. Otherwise, if you don't want me to see who you are, that's fine too. But if you want me to see who you are, go ahead and give StreamYard permission. So that's great. So if you have any questions, or feel free to comment with your suggestions. I'd love to hear where other people get their miniatures, any suggestions you have for people who are just getting started. It can be really expensive to just get started. You can see my miniature collection behind me. I have been collecting miniatures since 2003. And I have to say, I have a bit of a miniature obsession. So I've had to go on the wagon, so to speak, to stop buying miniatures. But the reason it's really important to be intentional about building your Sandtray miniature collection is because you want to make sure of the therapeutic content of the miniatures that you are collecting for your Sandtray miniature collection. Just like you would for play therapy toys, you want to make sure the toys that you choose for your playroom have a therapeutic value to them. So I'm going to focus on 3 of my top tips for today. Sandtray miniatures specific for children, focusing on being strategic about miniatures if you work with certain populations, and then also where you can get Sandtray miniatures without breaking the bank, so to speak, as well as some other places where you can get them online. So first of all, what age do you work with? If you're working with children, adolescents, and families, what ages do you work with? The reason that's an important question is it's going to help you, if you're really just getting started, it's going to help you kind of narrow down where to get started with the figures that you choose. And so if you're working with children and adolescents and adults, I use Sandtray therapy with adults as well. It is phenomenal. If you the figures you get if you're focused on working with children, they'll also be fine working with adolescents and adults and families. So working with if you do work with young children as well as the other populations, I'd still recommend getting started with the ones that are targeted for children because the other age groups will use them as well. Okay, so Facebook user says adolescent neurodiverse boys in a residential setting. Yes. Neurodiverse. Are they also kind of socially and emotionally delayed on the autism spectrum or some developmental delays as well? That's a really good point too, because if they are, then you're also looking at socially, emotionally, they'll be a little younger. So you may see younger, pretty high functioning, but some are, yeah. So they most likely, if you target for children, you're still going to hit that age range interest and therapeutic value because socially, emotionally, they're a little more lower, they're a little more delayed in that area. So they're going to be drawn towards some of those figures as well. So what I would recommend for that age group is I know people like to get when they're creating their collection. I know they typically like to get like people figures to be more realistic. My experience in working with children and even adolescents is they don't tend to use those. So I tend to recommend people don't start out with those. I have some in my collection, predominantly, to be honest, because somebody gave them to me. They do get used. And when I'm working with children and adolescents, especially that population that you're talking about, if you start out with categories of animals and trying to get, and I call them animal families, like for example, I have my miniature examples handy here. So if you get like a tiger, you can see the different sizes here. You can have like a mommy tiger and a daddy tiger, or if they're both the same, if you have same gender parents. You also, if you get smaller ones, then you have animal families. And the reason that can be helpful is it gives a little more psychological distance for the children when they're working. This is a projective technique. So you're going to see that if you're using a psychodynamic framework, it'll be that unconscious content. I also look at it with kind of a neurobiology and attachment lens. So I look at some of those internal working models, or what Daniel Siegel would call UMAP, me maps, you maps, and we maps, or that mentalization, how they're conceptualizing their perception of themselves, others, and relationships. So if you have categories of animals, you can have focus on like the jungle animals, the woodland animals, farm animals, have some cats and dogs, always have cats and dogs. I would get reptiles. I would get, so in the reptiles, definitely have I would try to have at least 2 or 3 snakes if you can. And some of the other reptiles and maybe some insects. I think it's all, and the reason for that is you can see some of the attachment things that they're working through, as well as some of those peer relationship things that they're working through, especially with adolescents, even kids though. You can get those using animals. You don't necessarily have to have parents, like the adult figures, because you can see that represented with the animals. And if you have the ability to get like sea life creatures, That's good. And have a shark. You always want to have a shark. So if you have boys, definitely make sure you have sharks, and some of those aggressive kind of animals. Also, have what I call like the fighting figures, like the army. You can get packs of those. And even I would have the army figures, I would have cowboys and Indians figures. And also here, so I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Virginia. I moved to the West Coast here in the United States about 5 years ago. And the fighting figures we used, even here in the United States, I find to be geographical. And what I mean by that is on the East Coast in Virginia, we had the Revolutionary War and we also had the Civil War. And so in Virginia, everything is Civil War related. So having Civil War fighting figures is, I think, helpful. Here on the West Coast, it really is more focused on pioneers, Native Americans. So I would also make sure so it's kind of specific to the area as well. And you can have both. But if you're really targeting and you really are just getting started, be really intentional about the ones that you pick. Army figures are great to start with. Knights, getting the knights is great. So Facebook user said, we actually spray painted some of my cheap army guys with a pewtered color paint and the boys love them. That's awesome. I never even thought about it. Did the pewter come off from were they the plastic ones? And did the paint come off? Did it chip at all? I'm curious about that. What a great idea. Kind of fancy them up a little bit. And that's also another good point there where you can get some of the less expensive figures and kind of fix them up a little bit. Yes, plastic. No, they never chipped. That's okay. I'm going to totally nerd out on you right now. So was it what kind of paint did you use? Because I've painted plastic and sometimes they chip a little bit. So I'd love to know what kind of paint you got. That's a great idea. Here's something to think about though, especially here in the United States. The last year has been so controversial, especially some of the diversity issues that have come up. So the nice part about that is we're having those conversations. The thing you need to be mindful of, though, people's here in the U.S. anyway, might be the same other places. There's a lot of kind of heightened emotions around the issue. So to me, that's always good information when I see it in my therapy office, because it gives me good information about where my client is. And then for that therapeutic relationship part, you kind of have to be mindful of managing that. For example, when I was on the East Coast, I still have them, Civil War figures. I got these die cast Civil War figures, and each figure, because they're fighting forces, they always have their flags. Like in the United States, the World War II Army figures, you have the United States flag, and then they always had the Japanese flag for some of our different countries. Anyways, there was a Confederate flag, and I always shared my office. And so one of the other therapists had parents coming in, and one of the parents, the dad, got really, really, really triggered and emotionally distressed seeing the Confederate flag, to the point that she had to remove it because he couldn't even sit in the room. So you just have to be mindful of those things. It's the only reason I bring it up. Be mindful of those things, and then you have to manage it. So Facebook user said Walmart paint. That is fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. So Army fighting figures, because you want to be able to have figures that can help express conflict, internal conflict, relational conflict, just some of that conflict that they're working through. If you live outside of the United States, then you're going to want to make sure you get some of those fighting figure forces for your collection as well, that's more specific to the area that you're from. It is good to have these fighting forces. All right, so we have, all right, so faucet therapy. Hi, Kathy. Using arts as a medium, I'm limited to getting the client drawing or making something. Yes, they'll use WhatsApp me a picture, image. Oh, that's interesting. Or I can see it on Zoom, but unfortunately not able to use physical models as they don't have what I would like them to have. So are you using teletherapy as opposed to being in person? Because you know what, I find that to be a really good point myself, which is drawing something. Sometimes clients are so kind of shut down about drawing, self-conscious, or they just can't do it. And the Santray miniatures to me are a really good way to help them to do that. If you can't, if they're not ready to do any drawing, and you can't kind of help them do that with a lot of encouragement. That's interesting. Yeah. So are you using teletherapy? Because if you're using teletherapy, there's a free Santray version. It's called, I think it's onlinesantray.com. There's a couple of paid versions as well. Zoom. Okay, so faucet therapy says Zoom. Yes, face-to-face at work. Have you tried the online Santray? There's a free version. It's not too bad, actually. I'll put a link in the comments for that, for those of you if you're interested in the online. There's 2 paid versions as well. This one's free. So fighting figures also for children, because their world involves a lot of the movies they watch, the popular culture for them focuses around the animated movies like Disney's and those kind of genres. So I would make sure to have some of those Disney figures, especially the Inside Out movie has the emotions characters. Those get used a lot. Star Wars, those are always really popular. If they have Minecraft is big with the kids, Fortnite. So you might be able to find some of those figures in like the department store. If you can find some of those, you probably go online. They tend to be a little pricey. And if they get used a lot, then that to me is beneficial to spend a little bit more if those are going to get used a lot. Think about the content. We're really focused on the psychological content though. So make sure you're just not buying any ones. You want to make sure to buy the ones that are meaningful. Also, I find it helpful to have like kings, queens, princesses, knights, wizards, dragons. So knights, wizards, and dragons, you can get some of that conflict quality to it. Also, I think it's really important. I have my collection over here. It's some examples. I think it's important, if you can, to get bride and groom figures, if you can get them separately, and being culturally diverse. So if you can get them separately like these, that is most optimal, because I find the girls use these a lot if they're working through parents getting divorced. It's really, or they're already divorced and they're going between home and maybe there's a lot of parental conflict. It's helpful to have them so they can separate. You can also, you can get them where they're connected. So it's kind of nice to have both if you can. But if you're just getting started, I would really try to find the ones that are separated. If you can't, it's helpful to just get bride and groom figures. You can make sure they're diverse. To be honest, I got these. Usually if you're go to a cake decorating store, you can get them there. And if you can find them on sale, that's even better. The reason the brides and grooms are representative of parents. So it's good to have those when you're working with children, especially if you work with children whose parents are divorced and separated. Facebook user says, how do we know the types of toys are meaningful? So that's a great question. The categories that I'm talking about here are going to be the ones that are meaningful. And then they are, because of, like, animals can give you psychological distance, and you can see how they're being used. Are there conflict? Are they getting along? Are they contained, not contained? So that's the other part of it, is making sense of it. So the animals are helpful to use, Disney characters, and then you're looking at how they're using them in the sand tray. Brides and grooms. So what I'm going to do at the end of this live stream, I will put, I have a free PDF called Must Have Sand Tray Miniatures, and it's got all the categories and examples of figures you can get in those categories, and you can think about which ones you're able to get. And then you always are going to add to your collection as you go along. So getting the animals, sea life, dinosaurs, you can get those in packs where you get a variety of them. If you get the plastic ones, that's best, because then they last longer. Have fighting figures, especially, honestly, boys use these a lot. So every once in a while, girls will use them. Boys use the Army fighting figures a lot. The Disney characters, both boys and girls use those, the animated cartoons. Kings, queens, princesses, knights, dragons, and wizards. Those are good to have, especially your population that you're working with, Facebook user, because you have the neurodiverse adolescent boys. So they tend to be kind of drawn towards the fantasy sometimes, not always. Brides and grooms, girls use those a lot. They kind of represent parents. Boys will use them too. I find girls use them more. Also important to have at least a couple of houses, because that is representative. It's a container. It contains family. So if you work in a school setting, it would be awesome if you got like a school or a blackboard or something representative of school. It's also helpful to get fences. Because these give a lot of good information about what they do with the fences. It's helpful to get the bridges. Bridges symbolically are representative of transition, and these are pretty inexpensive. I actually got these at a cake decorating store. I got this at Walmart over in the summer toys section. It was like $2 or something. The other thing you want to, if you get the packs of animals, they'll oftentimes come with these little trees, and these are good starter trees. You can see behind me, I have a tree obsession, so I like to get all different kind of trees. But if you're just getting started and you need some vegetation, you can use these. The other category that is helpful to have is making sure you have sources of water. Sources of water symbolically are representative of life and giving life. So it's always interesting to see what they do with them. So you can get these little plastic wells and things like that. So Facebook user says, wedding cape top. I got a great gay couple cake and gets used a lot. That's awesome. Yeah, I think now I think there's a lot more availability for some diversity that you'll be able to see, which is one of the things that's nice about having them separate as well, because then you can represent all um, all types of couples. So the other thing that's really helpful to get if you're, so we're looking at the kind of the natural figures. So this one, this a fire, this is my favorite one. This is a great fire. So look at the difference between this fire and this fire. Symbolically, they're going to represent somewhat different things. This fire came with with a pack of Native American figures. So it gets used different ways. I did get this one online. This one was a little pricey, and it's made out of like, I don't know, it's plasticky. So it gets used a lot, and it's very durable. And then also like volcanoes are good to have, because think of this symbolic content of volcano erupting. It can be smoldering beneath the surface, really strong emotions, anger, all those kinds of things. This one gets used a lot, and it's plastic, so that makes it helpful. So those are the categories. If you can get at least like a few figures from each category, that's ideal. And if you get that handout, the free PDF, which I'll post after the live, it'll give you all the categories on there. The other thing is having the tombstones is nice. The representation about grief and loss and dealing with grief and loss, also depression. These get used a lot. And then if you have this coffin gets used a lot. I got this at like Michael's here in the United States, like a craft store. It was like, I think $2, because I think you're supposed to paint it. So, and the thing that's good about it is it opens and it's big enough they can put things in here. So you look at what they put in there. And also, if you can get a treasure chest, ideally a treasure chest that opens so you can see what's in there. This one's got little gold coins. Because do they leave it open? Do they leave it closed? Is it buried? There's lots of possible options for this one. And then, so those are just some samplings of what's really good to have. It's nice to have resiliency symbols as well, like a nest and eggs. Nesting is where it contains the eggs, the symbolic aspect of eggs, new life, what's going on with the eggs, where do they place them in the sand tray. And then another resiliency symbol is butterflies. Butterflies get used a lot. Snakes get used a lot. Those are really good sources to start with. This one is focused on, these are categories to use with children. They'll also work with adolescents and adults. The other category is thinking about your specific population. So if you're working with neurodiverse adolescents in a residential setting, I would think about what are some of the common interests that they tend to have, and then make sure I have figures that are representative of that, because those will get used a lot. So if you're looking at the categories, in general, the categories, and then you're looking at the population that you're working with, you may want to prioritize getting figures for the clients that you work with, to maybe prioritize getting those over, let's say, kings, queens, wizards. If your population isn't as, let's say, attracted to those, so to speak, those aren't of interest as much, but maybe gaming figures are, then I would prioritize getting some gaming figures. And then you're going to see how they use them. You also want to think about the characters of those gaming figures. Like Disney, you have different Disney figures. They all have their own character qualities to them. Same would be true for the gaming figures. So if, for example, also if you're working with a population that's predominantly um, juvenile justice or court involved or foster care and adoption, you want to think about the things that those children and adolescents are frequently dealing with, and make sure you have some of those. So if it's foster care, then you may want to think about having some police, or having, if you having court symbols. Those are really hard to find, um, or having symbols for wine or alcohol or smoking or drugs or things like that, because the likelihood they might have had parents who were misusing substances and that's the reason they got removed from the home, you may find that those figures get used more. So, or if you're working with juvenile justice involved clients, then they definitely use a lot of police cars, and jails. Those get used a lot. So think about the population that you're working with and the issues that they're dealing with. And you may want to prioritize some of those figures over maybe some of the other categories, because you can start with your basic collection and then add from there. And then the other thing is, and I kind of mentioned this also, you want to make sure you choose figures that are ethnically and culturally diverse to make sure the population that you're working with, you get symbols that are representative of their lives, and make sure you have those. All right, so that is specific to your population. And then finally, where can you get these figures? Specific places to get them. So it is summertime. Here in the United States, it's summertime. And in summertime, people have, we call them in the United States here, we call them yard sales or garage sales. Other parts of the world call these different things, but it's basically where people sell off the things they're no longer using. And in the summertime here in the United States, there's tons of yard sales, and parents are always selling their kids' toys. I will tell you what, I always tell this funny story. So I have two boys. They're young adults now. When they were little, my younger son had his buddy in his neighborhood, and we were having this big neighborhood yard sale. Everybody was selling their stuff, and my youngest son was selling some of his stuff, and he was teaming up with his buddy down the street, and his buddy was selling lots of his toys. And my son calls me and he said, Mom, you have to come. My friend here, you have to see what he's selling. So I go down there, and it is like Nirvana land, man. He's got pewter figure. He's got lots of dragons and knights and lots of fighting figures, and the ones that are typically really expensive. And so they were on sale in his yard sale, and I pretty much bought out his friend's toys. I got them for a really good price, though. So I've bought boxes of toys. I've gotten some really good Christmas Village toys with fences and fountains. So yard sales in the summertime, this is prime figure buying time. The other thing is, ask your friends and family who have children, because parents are always trying to get rid of their kids' toys. If you do that, though, you have to be very, very intentional and specific to ask for what you want, or they will give you all kinds of figures that you do not need or you do not want. So you just have to be really clear about what you're asking for. I got a really good fountain from my sister when her kids were little. I think it was way back. I don't even remember how they got them, like McDonald Land Toys or something. But friends and family, about every 6 months, my kids, we would go through their toys and sort out what they wanted to keep, what they didn't want to keep, and then what we were throwing away. One of the piles was a donate to mom pile. So we would kind of repurpose their toys that would eventually end up in my Santray miniature collection. And I had to wait a long time for some of those figures, which is kind of the joke in our family. Because when they were little, I would be like, "Oh, you ready to get rid of that one?" My youngest son had this really good, I think he went to a pirate themed birthday party and got this golden goblet with jewels on it. It was like that big. And I would ask him like we'd go through the toys. So you ready to get rid of that one yet? Like, no, mom, you can't have my toy. So that was kind of our family joke. So family, friends, go to the dollar stores over in the toy section. You can get packs of toys. And the thing is, like for the jungle animals or the farm animals, they'll come with, a lot of times they'll come with fences. They'll come with a variety of animals. They may come with some trees with them as well. So you can get a bunch of things all together, like the army fighting figures, construction figures. You'll get construction men, you'll get those pylons and the barriers, which those are really good. Those get used a lot. So you can get packs, which give you pay a little bit more and you get a lot more. So you can get a variety of things. Facebook user says, my daughter does the same thing. Yes, right? We'll be at the store and she'll say, Daddy, I want to get this. And hey, you can get one too. It'll be great for your Santray. Yes, you know you have a Santray miniature obsession when your children are like talking to you about toys that you could get. So dollar stores. So there's also two other really good seasons, I call them buying seasons. So Christmas is a really good buying season for miniatures because a lot of people like to collect those Christmas villages. So in the stores, like here in the United States at Michael's, which is a craft store, or I think Hobby Lobby does, but I definitely know Michael's, which is a craft store, sells the Christmas villages. They also do Halloween villages now. So Halloween here in the United States is ghosts and goblins and ghoulish things. So you can get tons of figures from the village collections. And they're available during Christmas or Halloween. So those are prime buying seasons, which is usually where I get these gravestones, like the tombstones. The thing you want to think about, though, with the Christmas villages is they don't tend to be plastic and they tend to break pretty easily. They're not usually very expensive to get little figures. You can get packs of trees also for Christmas time. You get packs of the evergreen trees. Halloween time, you can get the trees that are for the fall season. So colors, leaves changing. You can get the dead trees, scary looking trees. And those are all good to have because of how they get used and what they may represent in the Santray with your client, the symbolic meaning of it. So you can get tiny fairy towns. A lot of the like Michael's, a lot of the craft stores here in the United States will carry those little fairy figures, which are awesome. They tend to carry those tubes of miniatures. You can also, that's where I got that coffin. So these are some of the more kind of, I would say, specialty areas in the craft stores where you can get those. Also, you can go to the fish section of the pet supply stores. You can get some good trees, treasures, things like that. Keep in mind, though, they're a little more pricey in the pet stores, but if you get one or two here and there, you might find it beneficial. They also tend to be more ceramic, so they're a little more breakable. And then also secondhand stores and thrift stores. You can get some secondhand. I get a lot of, depending on, I haven't found really good secondhand stores here on the West Coast where I'm living in the desert. On the East Coast, though, I had really good secondhand stores that I had to ban myself from going into because I would always go buy in there. And then finally, you can go online to get some miniatures. Trees are kind of hard to come by. Usually you have to get those online unless they come in like the packs of dinosaurs. You can get some trees in there, or some of the jungle, or of the farms. Those usually, farm animals usually come more with fences. So if you want maybe different kinds of trees and it's not Halloween and it's not Christmas, you may need to go online to get some of those. And then finally, you can, so online, you can go Child Therapy Toys is one place. Self-Esteem Shop is another place. If you have, I don't know, if you have other places where you found toys, I'm sorry, the miniatures, go ahead and post those in the comments. If you have, so do you have a favorite place to get your miniatures? Do you have a favorite place online? What's your favorite way to get your figures? Meaning, do you get them from friends and family, yard sales? So post that and let's see where you guys find your figures. And just as a recap, so you really want to make sure that you are creating a collection focused on figures that children will most definitely get, especially if you're starting out. You can start out and then add from there. You want to make sure you're prioritizing for if you have a specific kind of specialized population of children and adolescents that you work with, you want to make sure that you prioritize those maybe over some other categories that your population may not use as much. And then also, there are a lot of great places to get Sandtray miniatures, yard sales, friends and families, thrift stores. You can go to department stores, get them in packs and places like that. So it doesn't necessarily have to break the bank, so to speak. So that is it for today. Thank you for joining me. And if you are interested, I will post in the comments below. So to find the comments, you just want to click on the comments tag and the comments will drop down and you can look for my comment. I'll post a link to a free copy of my PDF must-have Sandtray miniatures. Also post where you love to get your Sandtray collection. And also, for those of you who are using teletherapy, I'll post a link to that online, that free online Sandtray app. Also, if you found this helpful, please share it and like it so that others can watch as well. And also, if you're interested, I have 2 upcoming online Sandtray trainings. The first one is getting grounded in Sandtray, using Sandtray in play therapy, really focuses on people who have not really taken any Sandtray training and you really want to get a good grounding, some fundamental aspects for using Sandtray so you can use it effectively and know what you're doing. That one is coming up on Saturday, July 17th. I'll post a link for that in the comments below. And then I have another Sandtray training, which is kind of adds on to the first one. You can take them separately. If you've never taken Sandtray, I would say take them together. The next one is in August, and that one is using Sandtray in play therapy with children and adolescents. So that is it for today, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.